All right, good afternoon. Um, I'll start with Myanmar and Bangladesh. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the violence in Myanmar's northern Rakhine state is putting all civilians at risks, with tens of thousands of people have been uprooted from their homes in the area. The government has said that all of 3,500 Muslims living in 3 camps in the Ratindong township have left the site and are now believed to be heading towards the Bangladesh border. Humanitarian activities in Rakhine have either been suspended or severely interrupted, resulting in 170,000 people not receiving the food they usually receive and 15,000 people not receiving primary health care. As of yesterday, 313,000 people, mostly women and children, who left Rakhine State since August 25th, have arrived in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. There is no indication that the pace of these arrivals is slowing. The UN and its partners are helping the government and the local community respond to the situation by providing food, shelter, health care, and water, among other means of support. The UN and the government are also urgently looking at solutions to allocate land to accommodate new arrivals. The scale and speed of the influx of people from Myanmar has overwhelmed capacity on the ground, and additional resources are needed. Aid agencies have prepared a preliminary response plan of $77 million to deliver urgent life-saving assistance to the over 300,000 new arrivals. And turning to Hurricane Irma, our colleagues at the UN Development Program report that their offices in the Caribbean have joined forces in a regional recovery strategy for Irma-affected countries. This includes debris and waste removal, immediate short-term employment for affected women and men, and community infrastructure rehabilitation in support of and upon request from national authorities in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, which also covers several other island states. The temporary training and employment for affected women and men aims to quickly inject cash in affected communities, tools, equipment, and technical capacity of professionals such as engineers and architects. The strategy also entails training and support of community-based micro and small businesses to help resume economic activities. A dozen of UNDP crisis recovery experts have been deployed in the region and are immediately available to provide assistance. And our humanitarian colleagues from the disaster assessment and coordination teams in the region have been deployed to the Turks and Caicos, as well as to Antigua and Barbuda. In Cuba, where massive flooding is reported, UNICEF is coordinating the purchase of 3 million chlorine tablets to support water purification efforts. And you will have seen that yesterday afternoon we issued a statement in which the Secretary General said he was saddened by the loss of life and destruction caused by the earthquake that struck the provinces of Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Tabasco in Mexico. And back here, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Colombia, Jean Arnaud, briefed the Security Council this morning, 2 weeks before the new verification mission starts its activities. He noted that the recent formal transformation of the FARC-EP into a political party was the culmination of the ceasefire in the country. Mr. Arnaud briefed the Council on the preparations of the verification mission, deployment, staffing needs, and logistics. He also stressed that the temporary ceasefire agreement reached between the government and the National Liberation Army provides that the UN would assist with the verification of commitments made. Further discussion starting this week should lead to recommendations in the Council in the very near future, he said. His remarks are available in the office, and this afternoon the Security Council has scheduled a meeting on the D.P.R.K. at 6 p.m. Turning to Niger, I want to flag the statement by our new emergency relief coordinator, Mark Lawcock, on the conclusion of a 3-day visit to Niger. He commended the government for tackling the country's complex humanitarian crisis, including leading the provision of life-saving aid to 400,000 people in the Difa region, where half require humanitarian assistance, and Boko Haram attacks remain a grave threat. And according to the World Health Organization, the cholera epidemic is reaching alarming proportions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, impacting 20 of the country's 26 provinces and major cities, including Kinshasa. An average of 1,500 cases per week have been reported since the end of July 2017. To date, there are more than 24,000 suspected cases, with 528 deaths, according to government sources. And our colleagues and friends at the International Organization for Migration today released a report saying the number of migrant deaths over the past 3 years is likely to be much higher, as many deaths are not recorded. Since 2014, more than 23,000 migrant deaths and disappearances have been recorded globally by the IOM. However, many families have spent years not knowing whether their loved one is alive or dead, and so few bodies of missing migrants are ever identified. The report examines the challenge of collecting data on missing migrants and what could be done to improve this. And a second part of the report will be released in November, analyzing the data that is currently available. More information on the IOM website. And tomorrow at 3:30 p.m., Miroslav Lajčák, the president of the 72nd General Assembly, will address you at the General Assembly stakeout. And, of course, today the Secretary General will be speaking this afternoon to the closing session of the 71st session of the General Assembly. And today we say thank you to Zimbabwe for paying its budget dues in full, making it the... 127. You overshot it, but at least you shot it. So if you have a question, it's 126.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, this is just a question about a high-level meeting that I noticed was scheduled for the Delegates Lounge this afternoon. Do you know what the subject is? And secondly, whether there's access by the media to it?
What's the meeting?
It just said the lounge was closed for a high-level...
the Delegates Lounge? I don't know.
For a high-level meeting.
I don't keep tabs on the use of the bar, but we can try to find out.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Excellent. Yes, sir. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Stéphane. Regarding the situation in Myanmar, the High Commissioner for Human Rights made a very strong statement calling it a typical example of ethnic cleansing. Does the Secretary General endorse that view?
I think the Secretary General expressed his views, I think, very clearly and strongly when he spoke to you on Wednesday, and I would expect him to address the situation in Myanmar in clear terms during his press conference on Wednesday. Mr. Lee.
Sure. Just first on Colombia, the Colombian ambassador had said basically it's in the Secretary General's hands how to support the ELN deal, and the President of the Council just said basically the same thing, that the Council has said they're waiting. So when you said discussions, are these discussions between Mr. Arnault, ELN, and Colombia, or with member states, or how does it work?
I think Mr. Arnault is having discussions along with member states. When we have something more, I will share it with you.
But with ELN? I guess
that's all I can tell you right now.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you, you'd said, since, that Mr. Chambas did go to Togo, and the protests have continued and have been broken up repeatedly at night. I don't know if UNWA, the West Africa office, has put out a statement, but Mr. Chambas apparently called a wire service and said that he supports a proposed bill by the government that might limit it, institute a term limit, but that would involve the current president remaining in power until 2030. And
I saw I think it was a Reuters piece. I saw it as well. We're trying to check the quotes, so I can't.
Can you actually?
That's what we're
right.
desperately trying to do. I would also refer you to a statement I think he issued on Friday, in which he made some comments on the discussions ongoing in the cabinet on that particular law.
But just even as you check the veracity of the quotes, can you say what Antonio Guterres' view? Does he think that the UN should be in the business of giving a blessing to a president whose family has already been in power for 50 years?
I think that
serving
would,
until 2030?
I think that would imply. I think I would first have to check the quotes before I would ask for the Secretary General's position on what may or may not have been said. Stéphane.
Thank you, Stéphane. An Egyptian lawyer, Ibrahim Metwali, he disappeared. He was going to Geneva from El Cairo to participate in a human rights conference. And this lawyer, he represents also the family of Giulio Regeni, the Italian that disappeared last year. So. Do you know about this? Apparently, it's been arrested, but no one knows.
I'll check. I'll check with our human rights colleague if we have any information on this. Carla.
Does the Secretary General or anybody else here have any comment on the head of NATO's remarks about North Korea which were really very, very provocative remarks. And is NATO now a global military?
Well, I think NATO is what it is, and I would refer you to them. I think the Secretary General's own position on the seriousness of the crisis in North Korea was outlined very clearly last week, and his deep concern, and I think he underscored that for him it was the biggest issue that we're facing as we move into the General Assembly. Nizar.
I wonder if you have made a statement regarding the death of 18 Egyptian soldiers today. Did you issue any statement about that?
We do not have any statement. We obviously send our condolences to the government and people of Egypt on this attack.
With Deir Zur retaken by the Syrian army, are there any negotiations to resolve this situation in Idlib, which is, of course, hosting more than 1 million refugees?
I'm not aware that we're directly involved in any discussions. Abdelhamid.
The follow-up, Stéphane, to my question last week about the Shamasni family, and you promised to get in touch with Mladinov's office. Did you?
I think I don't have an answer with me. If we have something, they'll bring it in.
Okay, my second question. There is a cemetery near the Holy Mosque of Al-Aqsa, and the Israeli bulldozers today destroyed part of it, which contains some of the corpse of famous companion of the Prophet. It's called the Cemetery of the Martyrs. So there was destruction of this historic cemetery today, started today. Is there any also, are you aware of?
I will check on those reports. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Stéphane, General Zahreddin, he's a general in the Syrian army, made a statement today saying, advising, under brackets, all the refugees, not Syrian refugees, not to come back to Syria. What's your position on such statements?
Look, first of all, what is important is that people have the right to make the decision when to go home. Refugees should not be pushed back into going back to places that are not safe. It is for them to make those decisions. Syria is obviously a country that is still that's seeing pockets of fighting, of deep fighting, of insecurity, and I think people have to make up their own minds and to make sure that when they go home or when they go back to Syria, there are the facilities and support that is needed.
But now we are not talking about the refugees' point of view. It's about like an official statement from an official general in the Syrian regime army who's threatening the refugees about coming back.
Well, I don't think anyone should be threatened. I can only speak. I haven't seen the particular statement. What I'm saying is that what's important is to first and foremost keep in mind the needs and the wishes of the refugees. On the Shashmanesh family, Abdelhamid, UNRWA issued a statement on September 6th on the eviction of the family, and I'm told that UNSCO will also reflect the case in the upcoming briefing to the Security Council. Matthew.
I wanted to ask about Kenya and Cameroon, but on Kenya, two things. One, overall, President Kenyatta now it's unclear when the runoff will take place, but he said if Raila Odinga wins the runoff, he can just be impeached. He's assured his supporters that it wouldn't have any impact. And so I know that the Secretary General's sort of initial and revised statement both encouraged all sides to follow the legal procedure. Do you view that as basically saying if I lose the election, my party will just take out the winner?
Look, I'm not going to start commenting on campaign rhetoric. As a matter of principle, political campaigns should be held in an atmosphere of dialogue and without threats. I think countries, whether it's Kenya and others, have constitutional mechanisms, legal mechanisms, and those should be followed. And
then the second one, and it's related to actually the Cameroon one, it just has to do with sort of UN staff. I know I've asked you before about Rosalind Kambe, and the reason I want to ask you is that there's now you can find it in published reports, a request that she not continue to serve on the Independent Electoral and Boundary Commission for lack of partiality. And I'm not saying she is or she isn't, but I guess I'm just wondering, what is the UN's thinking in allowing relatively high-level DPA staff to go out and function in a political function? And at what point does it become? People are starting to wonder: is she operating for the UN there? Is there any way to say that
she's not operating for the UN?
Right.
She's on special leave without pay, operating in her own capacity. I've seen, like you, I've read press reports regarding the issues regarding the Electoral Commission. Those issues need to be resolved within Kenya and within the legal framework.
But is there a point at which a UN staff member on leave that it's almost inevitable that people perceive them as part of the UN? Are there any kind of guidance on what they should or shouldn't do?
She no doubt submitted a request to go on special leave, and that request was accepted. And it's clear that she's doing her work in her personal capacity. Abdelhamid Denizar.
In his message to the Security Council last week, the Secretary General stopped short from calling for a meeting on Myanmar. Now, almost a week later, the situation is getting worse and things are deteriorating. Is the SG considering now officially requesting the Security Council to uphold its responsibilities and hold a meeting?
I think the Secretary General made his point clear in the letter he sent to the Security Council, and as I said, I think I would expect him to have more to say on Myanmar when he speaks to you on Wednesday. It's not a good career move to steal my boss's thunder. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of quick questions on next Monday's high-level meeting on reform. One, do we know what time that's going to be? And number two, what does the Secretary General hope to get from the meeting?
Well, on the time, I'll check. The Secretary General is delighted Secretary General is delighted at his participating in the meeting. I think it's clear that we need the support of the United States and other member states who are interested in reform for the Secretary General to help push the reform agenda through. The member states are critical and key to this reform process, and it's for the Secretary General. It's a very important meeting in which he can participate and ensure that the member states and him are on the same wavelength in terms of achieving reform to get a United Nations that is more fit for purpose and more nimble and more effective than it is today.
Lebanon has sent a letter to the SG and Security Council President, two identical letters, complaining about the Israeli violations, especially recently about the city of Saidun breaking sound barrier there. The aircraft. Is there any response to these letters?
The letter was circulated, I believe, to the Security Council as it was requested. UNIFIL will report, the UN will report in due time on the violations it's observed. Matthew.
I went to ask in Cameroon and something called UN Open University, but I had asked you 2 times last week about a UNHCR staffer who'd said that the Anglophone movement in Cameroon is a terrorist and should be repressed. And UNHCR did write over the weekend and say that the post was taken down. But I've asked them a few questions, and in fact, I want to ask you, because it's not just a UNHCR question. What is the policy of the UN and its agencies on staff members identifying themselves as UN staff on social media? And is there a consistent policy across agencies? Because I know I've seen UNRWA issue press statements about misplaced tweets or whatever.
Staff members, whether professionally or personally, should exercise common sense and should understand that if they're staff members, their actions could be interpreted as being the official position of the UN. So it's a matter of using common sense. And for questions on the exact post, I would talk to UNHCR.
That is a system-wide policy.
That is a basic, hopefully idiot-proof policy.
Because people in Cameroon, they're pretty upset about it. They don't think that just saying I'm taking it down is sufficient. And they've seen other answers by other agencies kind of clarifying why.
Well, I mean, I think if you have questions related to UNHCR, you should ask them. Nizar?
Yeah. On Yemen, obviously Hadi government, which is still a disputed government by many parties in Yemen, has leased Socotra Island, a big island, to United Arab Emirates for 25 years. Do you believe that this kind of action, leasing an island for 25 years, is a wise thing or legal thing?
I can't comment on the legality.
Given the discord in Yemen.
I can't comment on the legality issue. Joe?
Yeah.
Sorry, and then if
I believe you said last week that you or your office was going to follow up regarding the question on Jeffrey Sachs and the comment he made about President Trump calling him a sociopath, and there have been other instances of his personal criticism of President Trump, and a question of whether he prominently enough made it clear that he was expressing only his personal opinion and not on behalf of the UN. Is there going to be any follow-up to make
it's
sure
clear that
he
he's not
follows
expressing the UN's, the Secretary General's opinion.
Well, you say it's clear because...
Well, it's clear because I say it.
I understand that. But is it clear to readers of what Jeffrey Sachs
hopefully
says,
that's,
or listeners,
that's your,
if,
you know...
if he doesn't expressly disassociate himself and say, as many do, you know, when someone from the government is giving a speech, they always say, this is my personal opinion, not an official position of X agency. I don't know that he says that.
I think, and speaking as a matter of principle, and hopefully this could be common sense, you're talking about people who are $1 a year, who are not full-time UN envoys. So I think unless they clearly state that they are speaking as a UN envoy, it should not be considered speaking as a UN envoy.
Usually it's the converse.
Excuse me.
Usually it's the converse. I mean,
what I'm saying is that people who are $1 a year are temporary envoys. I think that would seem to me like a logical policy to put forward, which I will suggest.
Except that it's not necessarily widely known what his salary is. So
it's $1 a year.
I know you're saying that here, but if somebody's hearing him or reading about him
but I
and
think
knows that he's a representative of the UN.
I mean, we can go around circles here, Joe. I think unless he clearly says he is speaking in his role as a UN advisor, then what he says should not be considered to be UN policy. Iftikhar.
Thank you, Stéphane. This issue was raised by my colleague Abdul Hamid quite some time ago. It's about access to DC2 building. They don't recognize UN passes, and they call people whom you to see, then they come down and escort you in. But we could not even access the bank.
You have to. I'm sorry for that. You should probably deal with our Malu office colleagues. There's also a bank here in this building. Carla.
Has the United Nations ever officially acknowledged that Security Council Resolution 678 against Iraq and 1973 against Libya had disastrous consequences?
I'd like to say it was before I was born, but it's not. But I'm not going to get into the historical record. I think that's been written. Madame.
Has there? There's no official comment?
I don't. It's a research question. Yes.
Thank you. Is there any meeting during this general debate on the refugees, specifically on Lebanon, please?
Not that I'm aware off the top of my head. I do expect to have by this afternoon, I've been promised a list of all the high-level events for you. Evelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. I wanted to tell you we have 3 of the Hammarskjöld Fellows here.
Welcome.
Ray from Zimbabwe, Mercy from Nigeria, and Zainab from Sudan.
Great. Welcome to all of you.
And the 4th, the Afghani, is delayed because a cousin of his was killed and shot.
Okay. Anyway. Thank you. Bye.
I have a question.